Hey, Leonard here. In this video, we're going to talk about the basics of pulling focus. This video assumes you have zero experience pulling focus, but don't worry, if you have pulled focus before, there will be some helpful info and tips in this video. Before we get started, if you like these videos and you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button for me. We're trying to get to 25,000 subscribers by the end of the year. This video is sponsored by MediaBox Camera. MediaBox is your go-to boutique rental house located in the west side of Los Angeles. They have been good friends of mine for many years, and they offer expert service, high quality gear, and personalized attention. Whether you're shooting a small project or a big production, MediaBox is the place to go. The most important thing you need to understand about pulling focus is the concept of depth of field and the four factors that will affect it. Depth of field is the distance between the closest and the furthest object that will be sharp in your camera or your photograph. The number one mistake that I see new focus pullers make is not understanding the concept of depth of field. The reason why depth of field is so important is because that's the area where we're trying to keep our subject. That's the area of the image that will be sharp and in focus. So as the subject is moving maybe further away from camera or closer to camera, we're adjusting where that depth of field is. And as we move that depth of field, it's also shrinking and it's also growing. So depending on if you're getting closer to the camera, if the subject moves closer to the camera, as you're pulling that focus close, that depth of field is getting shallower and shallower. And as they're walking away from the camera, it's going to get deeper and deeper, and it's going to be easier to keep them within that depth of field. This is why it's so important that we get accurate measurements and marks when we're doing a shot, because then we know exactly where we need to have that focus and that depth of field at. Okay, so let's talk about the four factors that determine your depth of field. Number one is your sensor size. So this camera right here, this is an Alexa 35. This sensor is a Super 35 sensor. The size of that sensor or the size of the film is going to determine how shallow or deep your depth of field is. The smaller the sensor, the wider the depth of field in general. So if you're on a small sensor like a micro 4/3 sensor, your depth of field is going to be very wide. If you're on a larger sensor like an LF sensor or even Alexa 65 sensor, your depth of field is going to be very shallow to start out with. So that's going to be like kind of like your base depth of field. So just in general, things will either be shallow or they'll be very deep. The second factor that's going to determine your depth of field is the focal length of your lens. So wider lenses have a very wide depth of field, and longer lenses have a very shallow depth of field. So this is a 35 millimeter lens, so this one's kind of in between, but it's still going to have a decently shallow depth of field. And again, it's going to determine what size sensor you're on, how shallow that depth of field is going to be as well. The third factor that determines your depth of field is your stop. So your aperture or your iris. So if you are wide open at like a 1.4, your depth of field is going to be very, very shallow. But as you close down the lens and say you go to like a 16, your depth of field is going to be way deeper. So that's something people will do. A quick way to kind of help get you some extra depth of field is by adjusting the stop. So if you can close down even just a stop, it's going to be noticeably different. It's going to definitely deepen that depth of field. It's going to make it a wider range of depth of field. The fourth and final factor that determines your depth of field is the subject's distance to and from the camera. So the closer a subject is to the camera, the shallower your depth of field is going to be. And then the further they get away, the wider that depth of field is going to be. This is why when subjects are further away, it's a lot easier. But then as they're coming closer to the camera, it's going to get a lot harder because that depth of field is shrinking very fast the closer they get to it. An important thing to understand about these four factors is that all of their effects stack on top of each other. So if you're shooting on an Alexa LF with a 180 millimeter lens at a 1.4 and the subject is 2 feet away, your depth of field is going to be literally like razor thin. You're going to have very, very shallow depth of field. So the opposite of this principle is going to be the same. So if you're on like 8 millimeter film or a micro 4/3 sensor with a 9 millimeter lens at a T16 and the subject is 20 feet away, your depth of field is going to be ginormous. So basically everything probably up to just a couple feet in front of the lens and to infinity is going to be sharp and in focus. So you're not going to have to worry about really pulling focus as much. So that's something you really have to consider when you're pulling focus. So all of these factors together are going to determine how much you're going to have to pull focus during a shot. So even if you're doing just a simple dialogue scene with an actor sitting down in a chair and you think, oh, well, they're not really going to be moving very much, I'm not going to have to pull focus. But depending on what you're going to be, what all of these factors are, any kind of movement they make forward or backward is going to change where you're going to have to pull that focus, because they can move in and out of that depth of field very easily, especially if it's shallow. So I've set up a basic shot here to show you how important understanding depth of field is. So we're on the Alexa 35, which is a Super 35 sensor. We're on a 50mm prime lens at a t-stop of a 1.5, so we're wide open on this lens. And I'm about 4 feet and 7 inches away. I'm just going to show you real quick. Even as I'm talking now, you might see how the focus on my eyes is not staying sharp. So even if I just kind of lean just a little bit in and I'm talking to you, or leaning back, I'm losing focus. So this is why it's important that you always have to be riding that wheel and pulling focus and adjusting, because you can't just measure it out and think like, oh, this is it, I've got the focus. This is the number one mistake that new focus pullers make. You always have to be adjusting the focus. You have to be riding the wheel, because if, you know, actors aren't going to sit stiff just like this and never move. They're going to be emoting, they're going to be getting into the scene, they're going to be leaning forward, they're going to be leaning back, they're going to be going all over the place, right? And so you have to be riding that wheel with them constantly. Otherwise, this shot is unusable. So this is a great example of why you need to understand depth of field and why you have to always be adjusting your focus during a shot. Let's get into some of the gear. So if you're just starting out, I think it's important that you learn how to pull focus on a manual follow focus. So this is a manual follow focus. This is an Arri FF5. So the reason why is because this will teach you the directions that you need to roll the wheel in order to throw the focus or bring it closer. All manual follow focuses will go the same direction. So the way that I like to think about throwing focus and pulling it closer is you want to spin it, and then out of the bottom is where you're going to be throwing it or pulling it. So that's just kind of how I think about it in my head. So as I spin it this way, I'm throwing the focus deep. And as I spin it back clockwise, I'm bringing the focus closer to me. So I'm pulling closer and then I'm throwing deep. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. So if you're going clockwise, you're pulling closer. If you're going counterclockwise, you're throwing it. But that gets a little complicated. So just think about it as throwing out and pulling in from the bottom of the wheel. And like I said, that's how it's going to be on all of the manual follow focuses. It'll also be the same way on the wireless follow focus system. So if your wireless focus system goes down for any reason, you want one of these as part of your camera package so that you can throw this on and you have an easy way of pulling focus. So that way you're not doing it off of the barrel. And that can get very difficult, especially if you're doing handheld and you're moving around a lot. You at least want to have a manual follow focus to pull focus from. So remember we talked about that depth of field shrinks as the subject gets closer or the camera gets closer, or it gets deeper as they're getting further away. So this is something important you have to understand when you're pulling focus. You don't pull focus at a constant rate. So you're not spinning this wheel at a constant speed, because if you do, your subject's going to get out of focus and they're going to leave that depth of field. So what you have to do is, so I've pulled it all the way far. So let's say I'm going to go to 20 feet. So let's say our subject is at 20 feet and the shot is they're going to walk towards the camera, or maybe we're going to walk towards them, we're going to push into like a close-up. So what you want to do is, as the subject starts to move, you're going to slowly start to pull closer, but as they're getting closer, you're going to have to ramp up and you're going to have to get really fast, especially if they're going to come really close to the camera. And so, and the opposite is true if they're starting close and then running away or walking away from the camera. You're going to have to start fast, and then you're going to, as they get further away, then you start going slower. So if we look here at our markings, you'll see what I'm talking about. So the minimum focus on this lens is 1 foot 3 inches. So as we're pulling away, we've spun this wheel almost a full turn, and now it's only at 3 feet. So, but as the farther away we go, you know, to go from 20 feet to 40 feet, that's it. So we've just thrown the focus 20 feet by doing just a little minor turn. So that's what you have to realize is, so when they're starting out far away, so if they're starting at 40 feet and they're going to be walking towards us all the way up to a close-up, 40, they're going to be getting to 30, they're 20, 13, 10, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then you have to go faster. Otherwise, you're just not going to keep up with them. The focus will be behind them. And if you go too fast, the focus will be in front of them. So this is an important concept to understand, is because as they're getting closer, you're gonna have to ramp up, or if they're starting close and going away, you're gonna have to start fast, and then as you get into like 10 feet, you can kind of slow down. So it's kind of difficult, and it comes with practice. This is something that you're gonna get better at the more and more that you do it. So don't get too frustrated. So sometimes when you're starting out, you're gonna go the wrong direction. You're not gonna do the right speed. You might go too fast or you might go too slow. So that's why, just try to, if you can, get a rehearsal and make sure you get your marks. So that's why you're measuring out to get your marks, right? So you're measuring out, so like, okay, they're starting at 20 feet and then maybe they're gonna end at 4 feet. So then I know I'll just have to go to 4 feet. So if they're going 20 and they're going 13, 10, 8, 6, 5, 4. So I had to speed up a little bit. So this is why it's important you want to set marks when you're pulling focus for a shot. So let's say we're doing a shot where they're 20 feet away and they're going to walk up to a close-up at like 4 feet. So this white ring on this manual follow focus is so you can make marks with your little dry erase. And this little white line is where you're going to reference that mark. So that's going to be your witness mark. So here we have 20 feet, so that's going to be our 1. So I like to just put a little 1, I'll put a little mark and then put a 1. And then we're going to put it, say we measured it out, they're going to stop at 4 feet. So then we'll come here and then I'll write 2. So this is our 2 mark. So our 1 is here at 20 feet and then our 2 is at 2 feet. So that's our pull. So we have, this is the length of our pull. So we're going to be here and then we're going to come and we're going to end the shot there. As they start out, we're going to go slow and then we're going to have to ramp it up and then end at 4 feet. So when you are doing, let's say you're doing this shot and you're pulling focus, what you can do is try to get yourself, if you're not doing manual, if you're doing wireless, try to get yourself somewhere where you can see the actor getting closer. And you can even look at the ground and kind of give yourself little visual markers as to where they are in the shot. And it'll kind of help you know how fast and where you need to be on this wheel during that moment as they're walking up. It's good to have visual references to know where you should be during your shot. So you could even, like I said, with those visual markers, you could have them kind of go halfway through the distance, and then you could kind of find like, oh, okay, so the halfway mark, they're at about, so here's 20 feet, so let's go like 6 feet. You can be like, okay, have them come to measure out to 6 feet and kind of get a visual reference on the ground if you can, or if there's something they're next to on the set, and be like, okay, so here's my halfway point. I need to be at 6 feet, all right? And so as they're going, you could be watching them and watching your marks, and then you'll be like, okay, they're hitting that visual mark, I'm there, and then you kind of keep coming, and then they've stopped at 4 feet in front of the camera. So another concept to understand about that depth of field is our focal plane. So if we could see here, the symbol for the focal plane is that circle with the line through it. And every camera will have that symbol somewhere on the side of the body or somewhere on the top. So that so this is it right here on the Alexa 35. So that is where the sensor is, and that's where the lens is focusing the light right onto that sensor so it can capture an image. And so this is the mark where we're gonna measure from for our marks. So when we're getting marks, what we wanna do is basically, let's say, we're just doing a basic someone sitting and talking. So what you want to do is if they're close enough, you'll get your hard tape and then you'll run it out. And maybe you'll have your second AC help you, and you'll run that tape out, and then you'll take this end and you'll put it kind of in line with their eye. So you don't get it too close. Obviously don't poke anybody in the eye, but get it within so you can see. You want to be accurate. So you're going to run it out and level it with their eye. And then on this side, with your tape measure, you're going to have it right up where that focal plane is. So let's say we measure this out, and then like our subject is 3 feet. So that end is right at their, kind of basically their temple, and then with their eye, and then here we've lined it up with our focal plane, and we're at 3 feet. So that's our mark. That's our focus mark for that shot. But again, because of depth of field, depending on what stop we're at, what sensor, what lens, and obviously they're 3 feet, so they're pretty close, so that depth of field is going to be pretty shallow. So as they're talking, you're going to have to adjust that focus. If the subject is too far away for you to run your hard tape out, what you can do is in your kit, you should have some kind of disto laser measuring tool. And so this is just like a cheaper one. Some people get the really expensive ones. You don't have to. Just get a cheap, affordable one that you can use. And what you do is you press it and then the laser will become active. And then you want to point it at your subject. What I like to do is I like to aim it kind of right on their sternum, like on their chest, because it's in general, that's kind of pretty level with people's eyes. And so I'll aim it at their sternum and then I'll press it and it'll give me that measurement. Again, what you want to do is when you're doing that, you don't want to just go stand anywhere and then point this thing. You want to have the back of this laser lined up with that focal plane. And then you can do it, and then there's a guitar hanging on the wall. It's 9 feet and 2 inches to that guitar. So that would be my mark. So that I would then be like, okay, that's my mark for the shot. So I would go to 9 feet, 2 inches. And so those are the basic ways of how you want to get a mark. And there are soft tapes. Nobody really uses soft tapes anymore. It's just one of those tapes you roll up, you can run it out. They're pretty long, but the lasers have pretty much taken over what the soft tape has done. But the hard tape is good for close distances, and then you use your laser if it's just too far away. And then once you've gotten your marks, you want to mark them like we did for that example, is you want to mark them here, and then whether that's the beginning mark, so you would put a 1, and then if characters have multiple areas where they're going to be stopping, you would put your 1 mark distance, and then the next area where they're going to stop, you would put the 2, the next area you would put a 3, and then depending on how many focus marks that they're going to be stopping at, that's how many marks you're going to make. And then so that way you know where you are in the shot. So you can start, obviously you would start at 1, and then they say action, and you would start at 1, watch them, make sure, and then follow them going there 2, maybe they stop for a minute, then go, as they're moving, go to your 3, maybe they stop, and so on. So you want to do that to help so you don't get lost. You want to know where you're at. So one thing to note, when you're getting your marks and you're marking them either on your manual follow focus or your wireless follow focus, is that these marks might overlap. You might be going back and forth. It's not always going to be like closer, 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 or further, further, further. So sometimes you might, let's say this actor is going to start at 40 feet. So then I'd come in, make my mark at 40 feet, and I write a 1. So I've got 1, so that's my starting mark. And let's say maybe they come into 5 feet on the 2 mark. So that's our 2 mark. But let's say they go back further on the 3 mark. So maybe they come to 10 feet, right? So then maybe there's one more mark where they come really close to the camera. So they're gonna come really close. Maybe they come up to 2 feet. So now we have our 4 marks. So we're gonna start at our 1. And then as we know during the shot, we see our 2, we go to our 2, and then now they're moving to the 3. And then they're going to come all the way into the 4. So that's something you also have to be aware of. Pulling focus is not just pulling in one direction and then that's the shot. You're going to be moving back and forth as that take happens and whatever that action is for that actor. And the reason why we're writing these marks is so during that take, during that shot, we're not getting lost. Because if we didn't have these marks here, we could easily forget like, oh shit, which one am I supposed to be on, and then ruin the shot. So always put down what your marks are. Like number them out so you know where you're at during the take. Now let's say they're going to be doing that same shot, but they're going to be running up and they're going to be coming all the way in to like almost minimum. Let's just say they're going to come up to 1 foot 6 inches. So they're going to start 20 feet away and they're just going to sprint to the camera and then they're going to stop right at like a very tight shot. So what we can do is there's a really cool accessory. This is called a speed crank. So a speed crank allows you to make those really big pulls, because sometimes if you're pulling focus and it's a big pull, say it's like a big rack, so starting really, really deep, and then you have to come all the way close. Like I can't even get all the way around comfortably. I have to like twist my body and my arm just to go all the way, because you don't want to take your hand off because you have to be constantly moving. And so you can kind of get in like really awkward positions. So that's what the speed crank is for. So we click it in here, and then now we can do those really fast shots, and you can just kind of really get it. and you don't have to get your body in that awkward position. So now I can do a really fast rack if I need to. Or maybe it's, maybe just you're racking from something in the background to something in the foreground. Maybe it's not a subject running up to you. Maybe you're just doing like a really fast pull. And so you're like, they want to do like rack to something, and you gotta go and hit the mark, and then you gotta go back. So then this speed crank is what that's for. Now let's say you're doing handheld and you're working with the manual follow focus. And this is how I used to work a lot when I was first starting out on music videos. We would do a lot of music videos, and they would all be handheld, of course. And so this is called a whip. So it's just obviously because it kind of whips around. It's loose. And so you put it in the middle, same spot as the crank. And this allows you to kind of freely move around as the operator is moving around. And you kind of want to give it like a finesse touch, because you don't want to be moving the operator around. You don't want to mess up their operating. And so that's why this is so flexible. So it allows you to to pull your focus without affecting the operating. Or maybe the camera's in like a weird position and you kind of have to do something like this, or you kind of have to be like in front. Sometimes you have to be like that. So this kind of allows you to get in a comfortable position, but also if they're doing handheld, the camera's moving around, you can easily, because if they're moving around a lot, this is you're gonna be like, ooh. So this is what the whip is for. And there's different lengths of whips. This is kind of like the standard length. There is a shorter one, and there's also like a really long one too. But generally this is the whip that you'll get. And this comes off as well. Okay, so another accessory you can use with your manual follow focus is there's this little extension that you can get. And you can remove the knobs. You can remove the knobs on both the smart side and the dumb side of the camera. So you just loosen this and you pop it off, and then now you can add your extension. And you just might have to rotate this because there's a little thing it has to line up with. Same here with the knob. There's a little notch, and then there's a little pin thing in there, and then you have to line it up, make sure it's all the way on, and then tighten both of them. And now you have a little bit of an extension. Sometimes things with the built on the camera and stuff can get in the way, or you just need a little extension. So the reason why there's knobs on both sides is because sometimes just the physical space you're in, you may need to pull focus on the other side of the camera. And you can take this off. If you don't want it to be on there, you can take it off. It'll lighten up the camera a little bit, and it just gets out of the way of the operator. And then you could also use this knob on this side as well. So it's like you can kind of make this how you want it. Now let's say if you're gonna be doing like, if you're doing like a small project and you're gonna be operating and pulling focus yourself, manual follow focus is definitely the way to go, because then you can put this on your shoulder, and I would put the shorter knob on this side, and then that way you can pull your own focus while you're operating. And then now this can be on your shoulder, and then you can be pulling focus just like this as you're operating. So you don't necessarily have to buy this expensive follow focus. If you've got like a small camera package that you use for documentaries or music videos or whatever, there's a bunch of these small single-sided manual follow focuses you can get if you're gonna be doing that kind of stuff. And they're way cheaper. They're like, you can get some of them for like 50, 60 bucks. So I'll put a link to some of those down below in the description. And I forgot to make an outro to this video. If you haven't watched the focus pulling tips and tricks video that I did a while ago, definitely check that out. I go over like monitor settings for focus pulling, and I also like using like muscle memory to help you hit your marks and things like that. So check it out. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. I'll see you in the next one. Going off walkie.